Just minutes ago, we got breaking news that Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has officially filed articles of impeachment against Justices Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas.
After Senate Democrats formally requested that the Justice Department investigate Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, you'd think that things couldn't possibly get worse for the court itself. And that's when AOC said, "Hold my beer," and officially filed articles of impeachment against Thomas and his fellow conservative Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, I've got one clip to show you in this video, but this is fantastic news, even though it probably won't go anywhere. Any pressure, aggression activity from Democrats in the Senate and in the House of Representatives against this Supreme Court is very, very good and long overdue. I want to play this clip announcing the articles of impeachment, this move by Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and then we will get into it.
Two new moves that dramatically escalate congressional Democrats' fight over the independence of the nation's highest court. Just minutes ago, we got breaking news that Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has officially filed articles of impeachment against Justices Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas. That comes just after Senators Sheldon Whitehouse and Ron Wyden made a formal request to DOJ. They want a special counsel appointed to criminally investigate Supreme Court Justice Thomas for accepting travel and the loan of a luxury car from wealthy donor friends. NBC's Ryan Noble still with us on Capitol Hill. MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin is here with me. Okay, Ryan, what do we know about these impeachment articles? I know this story just broke. What happens next?
So this comes from, as you rightly point out, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from New York City, and she's filed two articles of impeachment against Justice Samuel Alito and Justice Clarence Thomas. And these articles of impeachment are not based in any of the decisions that either of these two justices have made, but instead specifically about their conduct around the office. For instance, in both Thomas and Alito's case, she is accusing them of not properly disclosing financial benefits and gifts that they were given by donors and others, and in some cases people that had business before the court or even had a vested interest, a political interest in some of the issues before the court. And she's also doing that in the case of Clarence Thomas, saying that he refused to recuse himself from certain cases that his spouse had a vested interest in as well. His wife, Ginny Thomas, of course, was very much involved in the Stop the Steal effort, the efforts to overturn the 2020 election and things along those lines. Also, she is accusing Justice Alito as well of refusing to recuse himself from certain cases of which he may have a conflict of interest. So
there you have it, folks. AOC bringing out the big gun, so to speak. So let's actually look at her official press statement. Ocasio-Cortez introduces articles of impeachment against Justice Thomas and Justice Alito. The unchecked corruption crisis on the Supreme Court has now spiraled into a constitutional crisis threatening American democracy writ large. Justices Thomas and Alito's pattern of refusal to recuse from consequential matters before the court, in which they hold widely documented financial and personal entanglements, constitutes a grave threat to American rule of law, the integrity of our democracy, and one of the clearest cases for which the tool of impeachment was designed. The Constitution of the United States explicitly outlines a higher standard of conduct for the judiciary to meet, far surpassing its existing bars on treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors for all civil officers, the standard of good behavior. Judicial ethics and rules to which even the lowest level judges are held make those standards clear. The lifetime appointments of Supreme Court justices make enforcement of these standards a solemn responsibility for the protection of our democracy. Thomas and Alito's repeated failure over decades to disclose that they received millions of dollars in gifts from individuals with business before the court is explicitly against the law. And their refusal to recuse from the specific matters and cases before the court in which their benefactors and spouses are implicated represents nothing less than a constitutional crisis. These failures alone would amount to a deep transgression worthy of standard removal in any lower court and would disqualify any nominee to the highest court from confirmation in the first place. Given the court's demonstrated inability to preserve its own legitimate conduct, it is incumbent upon Congress to contain this threat, the threat this poses to our democracy and the hundreds of millions of Americans harmed by the crisis of corruption unfurling within the court. Congress has a legal, moral, and democratic obligation to impeach. The first impeachment resolution includes the following articles against Justice Thomas: failure to disclose financial income, gifts and reimbursements, property interests, liabilities, and transactions, among other information. Refusal to recuse from matters concerning his spouse's legal interests in cases before the court. Again, that would presumably be the January 6th related cases, because Ginny Thomas, Justice Thomas's wife, was heavily involved, as the reporter noted, with Trump's efforts to overturn President Biden's legitimate victory in the 2020 election. And refusal to recuse from matters involving his spouse's financial interest in cases before the court. The second impeachment resolution includes the articles against Alito. Number one, refusal to recuse from cases in which he had a personal bias or prejudice concerning a party in cases before the court. Failure to disclose financial income, gifts and reimbursements, property interests, liabilities, and transactions, among other information. Okay, the Congresswoman maintains that such conduct, while under a judicial oath to faithfully and impartially discharge and perform duties, and a constitutional oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, warrants impeachment, trial, removal from office, and disqualification from holding future office in the United States of America. And they include the text of the impeachment resolutions: Barbara Lee, Rashida Tlaib, Bonnie Watson-Coleman, Delia Ramirez, Maxwell Frost, whom we've interviewed on this channel, Ilhan Omar, Jamal Bowman, and Jasmine Crockett co-sponsored the articles of impeachment. Notably, Congressman Jamie Raskin did not, suggesting that perhaps he disagrees with some of this. I'm not sure. It's important to remember, before I get into some other things I want to show you, particularly with respect to polling, impeachment is not a criminal prosecution. You don't have to prove things beyond all reasonable doubt. There is no potential deprivation of rights. Justice Thomas will not go to jail as a result if he were successfully impeached and impeached by the House and convicted by the Senate. Because it's a political process, it means that a lot of this is, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, determinable by the people bringing the impeachment. Again, there's no official criminal code. So treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors are unfortunately open to interpretation, depending on how good faith or bad faith the actor wants to be. So first things first, again, before we get to the polls here, because I would just want to remind everybody that the Supreme Court is wildly unpopular. It's awesome that AOC is doing this, in the sense that she's drawing attention to how dangerous and wildly irresponsible this is, and certainly how corrupt Clarence Thomas is. I think you'd probably make a case that Samuel Alito is corrupt as well. Certainly Thomas is with respect to finances. I still think you can make the case for Alito with respect to impropriety. The judicial code of conduct that the Supreme Court reluctantly adopted for itself at the end of the last term does require that justices behave in such a way as to not call the integrity of the court into question, and also requires them, to recuse themselves in the event that their impartiality might be reasonably questioned. And judicial ethicists across the country, as we've discussed, career prosecutors, other judges, many of them have said that Alito and Thomas have conducted themselves in which a reasonable person might, question their impartiality. Others say no, they haven't done that. That's a debate among ethicists. But let's get down to brass tacks. This isn't going to go anywhere, right? So she can introduce a privilege motion, AOC can, in which she can bring it to the floor, but then it can be tabled, right? Basically, before it gets to a full vote on the House of Representatives, Republicans can intervene and say, actually, I vote to table this motion. I vote to take her privilege motion and basically drop it in the trash can, which you may recall is what they did to Marjorie Taylor Greene's motion to vacate the chair, to get Speaker Mike Johnson removed from his position. The majority in Congress voted to table that motion, effectively disarming her. They can do the same thing to AOC, and they likely will. There's no Republican that will support impeaching Justices Thomas and Alito, if nothing else, because this court reliably gives them the outcomes they want. Not always, but reliably enough. And certainly you wouldn't want to have vacancies on the court with a Democratic president and a Democratic Senate, right? They're coming from the Republican perspective. So they're happy to turn a blind eye to all this nonsense. And even if AOC were to get it past the House, it would die in the Senate because you need a 2/3 supermajority to convict. Okay, so the bottom line is this is a messaging stunt by AOC from a position, the Democrats are not in the party of power in the House of Representatives. So she is using the tools at her disposal to make noise, to draw attention to this, to put the court on notice that they should probably fear a Democratic majority in Congress. And I think they should. As we've talked about, this court is just irresponsibly rogue. And I guess I'll give my stump speech at the end, but let's be very clear about a couple of things. This Supreme Court's unpopular. Okay. It has a 58% disapproval rating, 41% if you look at Gallup. If you look at, 538, sorry, I aggregated it too far. Right now, the Supreme Court's disapproval rating, I think, was in the upper 50s. Now the screen's cutting off, and the approval is in the 36% range. Again, wildly unpopular. 7 in 10, according to polls, say Supreme Court justices put ideology over impartiality. There's every reason to believe that that's the case. No, they don't do it all the time. It's not like right-wing interests are always served in this court. I don't want to say that. I'm not claiming that literally every time this conservative supermajority acts in the interests of Republicans and the right wing, just reliably enough that I think it's fair to call their impartiality into question. And by the way, I think it's also perfectly fair to call into question the impartiality of the liberal justices as well. I think it's a canard to assume that these actors who have political opinions, right, many of whom were politically active in their youth, don't have opinions themselves, and that there's some sort of superhuman automata that can distance themselves from their biases. I think that's unreasonable, which is precisely why I think there should be more democratization of the court. There need to be more checks on the court, because we can't trust them, any of them, to be these impartial androids, because they're not. And to assume they are is ridiculous. This one was interesting to me, the recent Supreme Court decision to grant presidents such sweeping immunity. When asked about it, I think this is funny. Obviously, 38% said yes, he should, which is terrifying. That's about 37% too high. But a decisive majority, 62%, said no, he should not. 67% of Republicans, by the way, thought that Trump should be given immunity. Then when you take it to generic president, then it drops down to 45% among Republicans. They're like, just any president, just not just Trump. Oh, then no, of course presidents shouldn't be given immunity. Really gross stuff, just proving that the GOP is a cult. But again, if you just talk about it collectively, right, should presidents as a whole have immunity? 70% said that presidents should not have immunity. Only 30% said yes. So the Supreme Court is constantly imposing decisions that are wildly unpopular with the American people. And I think this is a problem. The Supreme Court's legitimacy comes from trust, public trust. And I'm sorry, but that means you probably shouldn't be ruling against the people and popular will every damn time, and certainly not on major court decisions. I think that responsible justices would keep an eye on where the public is and not seek to defy them, and actually be terrified to defy them. Not saying that you never should, but kind of like how I imagine the Supreme Court should feel in striking down a congressional law or executive order. If they do it, I think it should fill them with utter trepidation, the idea that they're defying the political branches, the branches that are supposed to be more powerful than them. It's almost like break glass in case of emergency. Be very, 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 very careful about when and where you choose to defy Congress and the president. And I think this court is much too cavalier about it. But the bottom line is this. As I said, the founding fathers, to the extent that conservatives care about them, which is very rarely, it's cherry picked. The founding fathers intended for the court to be the weakest of the three branches, not equal, the weakest. The president and Congress, both individually, were intended to be more powerful than the Supreme Court of the United States. And in our current conception, it's reversed. The Supreme Court is the most powerful branch, effectively, because they get to tell the other two branches what to do and say that the other two branches can't tell them what to do. And if you can tell me what to do and I can't tell you what to do, then we're not equals. You're just my boss. And when you factor that in with all the other layers of accountability, again, the particularly gross stuff from Clarence Thomas, but the lack of binding ethics, the lack of enforcement mechanism, the lack of fact-finding mechanism, and the belief that these people can behave with impunity, that just doesn't work for me. So even though this on an official procedural level by AOC will not succeed, I think it's really, really good that she is making as much noise as possible in the current position she's in the Democratic minority. So this is really good. And Democrats, I think, should campaign on Supreme Court reform. Let me know what you think in the comments.